BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today This Week podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, plans for a new national park in Scotland are dropped.
It's a bit of relief, a bit of, thank God that's over, but really welcoming to see the government listening.
This is really hugely disappointing news. Once again, Galloway has been neglected by Scottish Government.
Accelerated planning for new reservoirs.
For them to speed it up isn't a very clever move. I think there's so many questions that need to be answered. There's so many things that need to look into.
And while it may have rained this week, it's not enough. Drought has been declared in the northwest of England.
The crops are just dead, really. You know, the rain's come too late. They're 6 inches tall, thin, spindly. Look like what you'd see in the arid Great Plains of Australia, really.
More on all that later. First, though, all this week on our sister programme, Farming Today, we've been looking at national parks. There are 15 of them in the UK, and this week plans to add another in Scotland were dropped, which we'll hear about in a bit. But we began the week by talking to Kevin Bishop, Chief Executive of Dartmoor National Park. And Kaz Graham started by asking about something we've been following for a while now, the row over wild camping on Dartmoor. After a long legal battle with landowners, Alexander and Diana Darwell, Supreme Court judges ruled last week that it is legal.
We're relieved and we're delighted. We hope that the ruling draws a line and we can move forward. It provides real clarity that people have a right to backpack camp as long as they follow the bylaws and the camping code.
And how significant is it on a wider scale, do you think?
Well, for Dartmoor, it's really significant. And also, I think there are lessons for other areas because the Supreme Court looked at this phrase, open-air recreation. The legal team representing Mr. and Mrs. Darwell was suggesting that had a very constrained interpretation. And so on Dartmoor, it would mean that if you walked onto a common, you couldn't stop for a picnic, was one of the examples they gave. You just had to keep on walking. Open-air recreation is behind the concept of our national parks, so it has a wider ramification, a positive one because of the judgment.
Some campaigners say that this should now open up the debate about the right to camp in other parks, which kind of sounds great in theory, but what would the difficulties be if that were to be permitted?
Well, I think there are some lessons to learn from Dartmoor in terms of the way in which we approach it. So on Dartmoor, we've worked with landowners and access groups to identify a camping map. That's historic, but we've revised it to represent the different interests. So that's almost like a partnership approach. We then have the bylaws which codify what camping means. Those are things that could be applied to other national parks if the government was so minded through the Access Green Paper, and you could have a localised approach.
Kevin Bishop there from Dartmoor National Park. Well, there has been much debate over the past few years about the state of nature in our national parks and how it can be improved while also supporting farming. In Pembrokeshire, which has many farms inside the national park, a nature recovery project was launched 2 years ago with the aim of enhancing biodiversity on farmland by the coast. Mary-Claire Carey-Jones has been speaking to those involved.
This coastal slope is botanically really diverse. We've got spring squill, bluebells, we've got thrift, and we've also got the incredibly rare pale dog violet. My name's Claire Flynn and I'm a conservation officer in the conservation team at Pembrokeshire Coast National Park. Connecting the Coast was developed as a sort of mini agri-environment scheme. So the aims of the project were to work with local farmers to make a bit of space for nature within their productive farming systems and to kind of buffer the wildlife back into the farms.
And how did the project go about doing that?
So we had funding from Welsh Government and we used that funding to offer farmers and other landowners a mix of capital grants which might pay for fencing for conservation grazing or putting in ponds or gapping up hedgerows, etc. Lots of different things. But also we were able to offer farmers management agreements on coastal pastures to perhaps tweak their grazing practices or change management practice, for example, restoring old hay meadows.
Hi, I'm Rob Johns and I live here on Llanferrin Farm and I farm it with my brother and we've lived here all our lives.
And the location of your farm is incredible. I'm standing in front of the sea, which looks amazing, and then behind me are mountains and fields and fields. So why did you want to be part of the Connecting the Coast project?
Well, it was just extending what I've been trying to do here for a long time, is get the coastal belt back to what I consider it should be. You know, over the years, gorse became more prevalent, and basically I'm trying to get rid of some of the gorse to allow other plants to grow and make room for the birds and things.
But how do you balance the needs of wildlife and the needs of running a commercial farm?
The fields which we've got a management agreement with the National Park, they are fields which we haven't cultivated them since the 1980s because it's very rocky. Now that we've got them fenced off better, which was a part of the grant scheme, we can graze those more in the winter time, and during the summer months they're not grazed.
Does that have an impact on you financially?
Not really, because we're getting paid by the National Park for keeping them in that state.
Marie-Claire Carey-Jones reporting there from Pembrokeshire. A rise in the number of deer is having an impact on habitats and farmland in the Broads National Park. Well, there they've carried out a drone survey to assess the numbers, and the figures have come as a bit of a shock. Anna Hill joined Broads National Park Environment Advisor Andrea Kelly and farmer Lewis Bohr to find out more.
What we've walked on is actually a well-worn path that's probably Chinese water deer. And if you look at this boundary dike between the nature reserve, the Fen, and our arable land, you've got the crossing point across the ditch.
That reminds me of the Serengeti and the buffalo going across the river.
Yeah,
I mean, they've trampled this side, haven't they?
If you look on the other side of the dike, in this ecologically sensitive area, they're doing exactly the same thing in this protected site.
Andrea Kelly, Environment Policy Advisor. What we've been doing is looking at the trackways. The trackways in the winter, in our permanent reed vegetation, can be seen from the air. If we think about the Fen here, 11% is being destroyed by those trackways, by those footprints. Total destruction, nothing is living. So if I were to try and get a consent from Natural England to destroy 11% of the Fen, I'm sure they would have something to say.
Drone surveys have been undertaken. The last one in the Broads was the largest ever in the UK, covering 25,000 hectares to gauge how many deer there are. It showed the densities were 20 animals per square kilometre. Previous work in Scotland has shown to allow regeneration of habitat, deer numbers had to be much lower, at 5 animals per square kilometre. Back out in the national park, Lewis Bohr told me the impact the deer are having on his business as a farmer.
That is a drought-affected field. We will not grow an agricultural crop, food crop on there again until the deer are under control. 2 years.
That's a serious choice you've made.
It is, and it's based on the finances insofar as 2 years ago we had sugar beet on there. When we came to harvesting, we didn't have a single leaf left in the field and they'd started eating the roots. And the other risk to us is when we're combining is contamination of the grain by deer faeces. So the plan is no more food crops on this 38 acres. They're going to be growing sustainable farming incentive options, wild bird and legume mixes. Well, we've been looking at the reed fen. And next to it here is some wet car woodland.
These are really rare, actually. Globally, wet woodlands have been destroyed, removed. I haven't been down here, actually, for probably about 3 or 4 years. And I'm surprised at what we're seeing now. This is visually dramatically different. We really have no vegetation here in this woodland at all.
Well, also with us here is Tom Ewan. He's from the Farming, Wildlife and Advisory Group in Norfolk. They've been working to try to get venison into the food chain from animals culled in the Broads.
We've been working with farm shops, pubs and restaurants. The small deer, the Chinese water deer and the muntjac aren't worth very much to a game dealer because they're smaller, they're more work for less reward. By creating more local commercial opportunities, it adds a value to the smaller species, which will incentivise the culling.
Would you like to see no deer, Lewis?
I have moles on the farm that cause me problems in my grazing. I control them every year, but We never wipe them out, and I would never wish to. There's a place for everything in the proper balance.
Lewis Bore there in the Broads National Park. Well, there will not be a new national park in Galloway and Ayrshire. The Scottish Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Goujon, announced this week that following a consultation, the park doesn't have enough support locally and so will not go ahead. Kevin Keane, BBC Scotland's Rural Affairs correspondent, was in Wigton in Galloway for the decision and told me how it came to this.
Well, this, Charlotte, has come off the back of the power sharing agreement between the Scottish Greens and the SNP when they were jointly in power in the Scottish Government. And really the motivation for this came from the Scottish Greens. They'd promised in their manifesto that they would deliver a third national park for Scotland by the end of the current Scottish parliamentary term, which ends next year. So there was a bit of a rush on. There was an open invitation for people, communities that wanted to bid to have a national park to submit their interest. 5 parts of Scotland did that, and then 10 months ago the Galloway bid was the one that was named by the Scottish Government as the preferred bidder. That then had to go through a due process, and in that 54% of respondents were opposed to the scheme, 42% were in favour, and if you just broke that down to local community representatives, then that gap was even wider. So it seemed there was certainly a fairly significant vocal opposition to this, although if you speak to those behind the bid, they think that actually there was a silent majority in favour, but it's those who were opposed to it who have now won out.
And what's been the response from Galloway and Ayrshire?
Well, I mean, quite a bit of shock, although over the last few days there had been some rumblings that this was coming. I mean, the people behind the bid say they've spent the last 8 years working up to this point, and all of that they feel has been shattered in one afternoon. Of course, on the opposite side, there are many, not least landowners, farmers who collectively had been opposed to this, who are breathing a sigh of relief. One of those farmers is Colin Ferguson, a dairy farmer from Wigton, and also you'll hear from Rob Lucas, the chair of the Galloway National Park Association.
I think it's a bit of relief, a bit of, thank God that's over, but really welcoming to see the government listening. A national park, obviously, it did bring some benefits, but I felt the trade-offs outweighed what benefits we could bring. This region needs employment, it needs people, it needs business, and I just felt a national park would, yes, it would bring tourism, it would bring people, and it would bring money into the region, but what we need is money, business and people all year round, not just for the summer.
This is really hugely disappointing news for not only the association and its supporters, but for the whole of Galloway, because once again, Galloway has been neglected by Scottish Government. Not only has a national park not been taken forward, but we've got no other proposals. We've got nothing else on the table, no promise of money, not even a timeline for when that might happen.
So is that it now, Kevin, or will the government look for somewhere else?
Well, I'm not sure there's any appetite for looking somewhere else, not in the immediate future, but this area, I'm in Wigton, and this area, this kind of corner of Scotland, the southwest corner, has often felt very much overlooked, and I think a lot of that had come out in the course of this process. And so the Scottish Government, as part of its response to this, has said that it will now look at some of the recommendations from Nature Scots report to try and enhance and build upon the concerns that some of these local people have raised around infrastructure. I mean, there's a road that runs from the main motorway at Gretna to the ferry port at Cairn Ryan that serves Northern Ireland, and there's long been concern that that's not been big enough to cope with the volume of ferry traffic and any additional tourists that might come with it. Of course, many people here would like to see more tourists coming if there's the infrastructure to come with it, so that they're not regarded as this forgotten corner of Scotland. And the Minister says that she will look at and consider very carefully some of those recommendations.
Kevin Keane reporting from Galloway there. Two proposed reservoirs have been given nationally significant status by the government this week to speed up the planning process. Decisions on the Lincolnshire Reservoir, which is planned for an area near Sleaford, and the Fens Reservoir, which will be built near March in Cambridgeshire, will now be accelerated. Ministers say the law will also be changed so that in the future all projects which are, as they put it, fundamental to national water resilience will automatically be designated as nationally significant. As we've been reporting, concerns about water supply for agriculture have been growing, this year in particular as it's been so dry. But these reservoirs, which won't be finished for more than a decade, are primarily aimed at providing water for houses. Plans for the Fens Reservoir have already been taken out of the hands of the local council. They're being looked at by the Planning Inspectorate. The scheme is expected to benefit 250,000 homes. In Lincolnshire, around 5 square kilometres near Sleaford will be flooded for this reservoir. Some locals have been fighting the plans for years. Hannah Thorogood is an organic beef, sheep and turkey farmer who stands to lose both the land she owns and the land she rents.
The proposed reservoir would wipe us out completely. So our home, our farm, everything would be gone.
What would that mean for you? Would you be able to set up somewhere else?
It would be heartbreaking. It's no word of a lie when you say, it's your life's work. It's everything that you've put all your energy, all your money, all of your dreams into, and for absolutely nothing if this goes ahead.
When did you first hear about these plans?
We heard about it in September 22, I believe. It's all a bit of a blur now because it's been going on for so long. And a letter came through from Anglian Water, just like any other letter. And I can remember seeing this letter and thinking, well, that's strange. I've paid my bill. And I opened it up and it was worded as if we'd won some sort of competition. And it said, your site has been selected. I think, oh, crikey, what we've been selected for a proposed reservoir. And it felt like a ton of bricks landing on your head because you just think it must be some kind of joke. Because apart from anything, we're on a hill, so we're not in a valley. And so what Anglian Water are proposing is to dig down 30 metres below us and for 4,500 acres around us and to scrape all of that soil back to form the banks of a reservoir. It's the most expensive way of storing water.
And yet, as the government is pointing out, we really need more reservoirs in England. And so they're saying that they now want this whole process to be accelerated.
Now, we absolutely need better water resilience across the country. That makes total sense. And, just a few villages away, we have the blue pipe coming down through Lincolnshire, through Cambridgeshire, across the country to set up an effective national grid of water, which makes total sense. However, that brings up the question of why on earth would they put a reservoir in this location here when there are so many valleys with maybe one house or no houses across great swathes of the country.
Now that the government wants this whole process to go more quickly, do you think this is basically a done deal, come what may?
I've never thought this was a done deal. I think when you look into the actual specifics of the design of this reservoir, it's fundamentally flawed in so many ways. Although it's absolutely hideous for us involved in it to have this hanging over our heads for so long, because currently we wouldn't be getting a decision until 2030. And so it's an unbelievably stressful way to live your life and run your farm when you obviously have no idea whether, whatever's going to happen. Can you plant the trees? Can you fix the fences? Can you build the barns? All of those questions that we all do all the time as farmers. Everything is on pause for all of us here. But I think for them to speed it up isn't a very clever move. I think there's so many questions that need to be answered. There's so many things that need to look into.
Hannah Thorogood. Anglian Water told us, we agree that the planning process should be expedited for various reasons, not least because we understand that our proposals will have an effect on landowners and the nearby community. We're committed to working with everyone as the project develops and gave careful consideration of the size and quality of agricultural land and potential impacts in the site selection process. Inevitably, major infrastructure of this scale is going to have an impact. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver lasting benefits for people, place and the environment. Well, the need for water resilience was underlined this week as drought became official. The Environment Agency says the northwest of England is in drought, while the Scottish Environment Protection Agency has said that in spite of some rain, there's water scarcity, especially in the east of the country. For months now, we've been reporting the impact of the exceptionally dry spring on farms across the country. Ollie Harrison farms on Merseyside.
It's a little bit softer than it was last week. We have had a tiny bit of rain, but the crops are just dead, really. You know, the rain's come too late. They're 6 inches tall, thin, spindly, look like what you'd see in the arid Great Plains of Australia, really.
How much rain do you need to make that okay?
It's too late. It doesn't matter now. No amount of rain will recover from the losses that we've had over the last sort of 6 weeks with not having any rain. The spring corn's the most effective. The winter wheat sort of is about 25% of our cropping. That's held on not too bad because we are on some strong land. But the spring wheat sown and the spring barley, that's just awful. And the beans, you know, instead of being sort of 2 or 3 foot tall, they're about 6 inches tall at the moment. So they will produce very little pods and very little flowers. The yield was capped probably 6 weeks ago when it was so dry.
And what will that mean for the bottom line?
Well, it's in the red again. Last year we were in the red from too much rainfall and no sunshine. And then this year we're going to be in the red again from the opposite. If you could have averaged the 2 years, we'd have done all right. But no, it's another loss. I can guarantee it now. Just looking at it, there's just not the potential in any of the crops.
It must be difficult because you've still got to do a harvest. You've still got to carry on, haven't you?
Yeah, it's literally just to minimise the loss. Anything that we get back now will just make a little bit of a less of a hole, shall we say? But it's not going to be much fun driving the combine because it's just going to be disappointing. You know, I mean, I think I've got some wheat. I'd be surprised if it does a ton to the acre. We need 3.5 to make a profit, but we've just had to stop spending on them now and just cut our losses, really.
The Environment Agency made it official this week, saying that there is now a drought in the northwest. I'm imagining that was not news to you.
No, they've been asleep for 6 weeks. Yeah, I could have told them that 6 weeks ago.
I guess this is just part of farming, though, isn't it? Contending with the weather.
Yeah, I mean, they say never work with children and animals. Well, I think Mother Nature can be a bit of a cow sometimes.
Ollie Harrison on Merseyside. Now, golden eagles have been extinct in England since 2015, when a solitary bird died in the Lake District. But this week we learnt that could be about to change. A conservation project in the south of Scotland, which began in 2018, has seen a huge increase in the eagle population there. And some of those birds have begun exploring places like Northumberland, the North Pennines, the Lake District, even Lancashire and North Yorkshire. Although, as yet, none of them has stayed to nest. Joe Lonsdale has been to meet wildlife enthusiast Ian Glendinning, who spotted an eagle in a remote corner of the Northumberland National Park just a few weeks ago.
So we needed a 4x4 to get here because we're in a pretty remote part of Northumberland. We're not saying exactly where, just to protect the bird, but Ian, tell us a little bit about the moment when you spotted the golden eagle.
Yeah, well, it was a total surprise. We came round a corner, a blind bend, next to some rocky outcrops, and there it was, just sitting on the end of the crag, and it opened its wings and glided away behind the outcrop, and away it went.
Now, you see a lot of buzzards around here. We've even seen a red kite on the way up. How did you know it was a golden eagle?
Just the sheer size of it.
Ian was right. It was a golden eagle, and he has a name, Tala. We know this from the South of Scotland Golden Eagle Project, which has translocated birds to the Scottish borders from the Highlands, and satellite tagging means they know where they are. The population in that area has risen from a handful to around 50. And as the project manager, Dr. Kat Barlow, explains, some of them have begun exploring northern England.
They're looking for new eagles, they're looking to see where are good feeding areas and so forth. They kind of create a visual map, and then when they're ready, they will settle on a territory and try and attract a mate. So in that kind of exploration phase, the birds will just wander and they'll go where looks interesting.
So I've driven now to one of the places where the Northumberland Wildlife Trust would just love to see golden eagles one day. I'm in the Simonside Hills, part of the Rothbury estate, recently acquired by the charity, surrounded by rolling hills, lots of sheep, and I've come here to meet the charity's CEO, Mike Pratt.
They're such an iconic species, and in a sense they should be here. So it's a really sort of a good
indication of what is possible if we treat the countryside and their habitat right, and they will come back.
Golden eagles predate on grouse. The shooting industry is an important part of the Northumberland economy. Might that be a problem?
I don't think, though, across the whole of Scotland that is an issue. And they're great to see in the sky. Great for the economy as well. People come to see them. You can see them up in the air now, couldn't you? Just overhead. It would be absolutely amazing.
Mike Pratt there in Northumberland. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.